like I said, I got to work on that. I don't think. Anyway, so I watch YouTube stuff mostly. I don't have the Twitter, and I don't have Discord, and I don't. I have Facebook, but I rarely use it. Uh, right, I just got enough junk in my stuff. I Google things. Things get Googled to me sometimes, and I don't know why they just show up. Because I guess because of stuff I Google anyway. It's kind of strange how that kind of suddenly magically works, right? With all the algorithms and other wonderful stuff that these companies put on our plates. Anyway, I watch a number of these channels where these people are interviewing MAGA supporters, and I struggle in general as to understand why so many Republicans think the way they do, why conservatives think the way they do, how are conservatives conservative? How do they get to be that way? And then you marry that to some of the colorful individuals that show up in some of these YouTube clips where they're interviewing people at these Trump rallies, as an example. But it's not just at the MAGA rallies. You can run into this anywhere and see and kind of see the same types of folk. And you wonder, who are these people and how do they get this animated? How is it that this easily slid from a political power group bullshit dynamic to some sort of neo-religious cult that's formed around Trump? Trump didn't set out to be some grand cult leader. It just kind of happened. What happened and how did that happen? I don't hear too many people talking or discussing that, and I'm not sure it's something that can really be discussed without a whole hell of a lot of effort. But it got me back to thinking my youth growing up in the 70s, 80s. I was 18 in 1985, so you can figure from 78 to 85 would be that period of time I'm equating to this youth. And I was subject to, this was before we had the internet. We didn't have the internet. The closest thing we had to anything remotely close would be a newspaper and a magazines. The telephone, right? So you're limited to who you know. So a lot of now this is a completely massive change from the current dynamic for the current couple generations of young folks coming up. Their experiences are way different from the rest of us that are their elders, if you wish. And so in this case, we were mostly surrounded by friends and family and our immediate communities, whether that be the neighborhood you grew up in, the town you grew up in, and schools and other civic things you might have been affiliated with. So my immediate family, a father who worked the second shift, 3 to 11, and was always whenever I saw him, he was angry and usually screaming at me. And while he didn't physically abuse me, he was not shy about using capital punishment, and well up until my mid-teens. And he also was extremely proficient at using an emotional scream and yell and cuss at you way of dealing with it. That fucks with a kid's head. It fucks with a cat. It'll fuck with a pet. You don't treat your dog that way, but you treat your kid that way, and your kid has issues and something. Anyway, so my mom was a Christian churchgoer who tried hard to be creative in a world that really didn't want her to be creative, and she was not a very good She wasn't a housewife. She was not a very good housewife. She was a mother, and a damn good mother, but not in a conventional sense. And for many years, especially in my younger years, she was involved in the churches as much as possible because it gave her an outlet to get away from the house. There wasn't any physical abuse going on between her and my dad, but there was a lot of disconnect, and that just grew as they grew older. They stayed together until he passed away, and at some point I think they just be this mutual, well, why should the other one get off easy kind of thing. Dad was 20 years older than Mom, like I said, when they got married. So that left me with my cousins and my aunts and uncles, and most of them rarely talked politics. If you heard anything, you heard stories about their military service and or church-related stuff, and or fishing. Fishing was a big thing in the family. It's not something I ever really grew into. My sister did, but I didn't. So, in our immediate community, when you had those conversations, it was usually with your parents having conversations with somebody that's the neighbor. They're talking over the fence about politics or about some kind of event. So you don't hear about, unless you hear about that directly, you don't hear your immediate opinions on that sort of stuff. So our only real avenue was the great educator. The next time you sit there and you look at some of these people that show up at some of these events, these political rallies that look totally like they've lost their marbles or are really truly delusional, and when they talk, it's just like they're talking about another world altogether. That's because they grew up and lived in a different world altogether, and they can't comprehend, and they're struggling to accept or even begin to understand the process that takes them to where they can accept that the world that they grew up in, that they think they know, is not the world that they think they know. So in this case, we had television, and television, I was one of the few privileges I think I had as a kid that I felt, I don't want to say superior. It's just I was different from my two friends because I had a television in my room. My dad had an old beat up little portable black and white. It was about this big, and it had a broken antenna. It had a broken antenna on it, so I had a coat hanger sticking in it and fiddling with it, and I could get pretty decent reception. There were times when I couldn't, but we're also talking pre-cable, so you only had a handful of channels anyway. And so, but the privilege was I had a TV in my room, and I could watch pretty much whatever the hell I wanted to watch, and I didn't have to watch what they wanted downstairs. And Dad usually wanted to watch sports, and I, growing up, equated sports with my dad too much, and I think this is one of the reasons I never cared for sports, because my dad was just a problem for me, and I don't think that ever quite pans out the way it just didn't. So the TV, you get small news clips a couple times a day talking about the grander scheme of things. So if you're young, you really have no idea what's being told. That leads us to the things called school education. Now, I only can tell you, in all the years I went to all the traditional years you go to elementary and middle school, junior high and high school, I only had one semester of government, and I think I had another one of civics. So I think in 10th grade you took a semester of government, which was basically to educate you in the basic how the government's set up, how the country was founded, how it was set up, and how it operates. And usually in those days it would accumulate in because in our high school we had several classes of government going on at once. There was enough, like I said, 1,000 damn students, so you'd have 4 or 5 versions of the same class being taught. So we would have a one year was a model UN. I think the year I was participating, we had a model UN because I somehow became a lieutenant in security at the UN or something. No, the year before we did Congress, because I remember as part of our assignments, you had to write to the person whose position you were going to portray in this reenactment, and I had to write to the head of security, their number 2 person, and ask them what their duties was and what they were expected, because I had to do a report on that crap. All right, so we were taught how government functioned, and then we had a class on civics, and the civics was a class trying to teach us the idea of how government and people that our responsibilities as a voter, as a citizen. And the truth is, as that goes, we have very lax responsibilities. we can get away with a lot of things, and people will turn a lot of eyes because that's just the way it works. And you don't have to go far to see that kind of perceptions and that kind of caricatures of people around you. So a lot of these uber conservatives come off on the lower end of the economic scale as being rednecks and farmers and people with their heads in the sand. By all intents and measures, a lot of these same Republican-based folks cannot seem to grasp that some of the very critical programs that they themselves and their parents depend upon are at risk by the people they're freaking elected. Someday they're going to wake up and say, "Well, wait a minute, where's my Social Security go? I paid for that. Where'd my Social Security go? I didn't vote for them to take that from me. I only meant for them to take it from them, the liberals, the ethnics, or whatever the excuse was." So, exposure to a very small group of family-related stuff. It's heavy into religion, so I doubled down in my family because there was more religion in the family, being we had some pastors and stuff involved too. And then the fact that once a week at least you would get together at a social event called church, which then would expose you to other families and other people, and so other people in your peer group that you would then see potentially the same people at school, but you're working in a different kind of circles and things like this. But it exposes you just a little bit more, and you hear a little bit more stuff. But what do you hear when you're young? You hear the stuff that's mostly pertinent to young people. Right? Not the big important stuff that's going on. We're still being influenced directly by our parents and our aunts and uncles and grandparents and their views and opinions, whether we think we are or not. In some ways, we can rebel and go the opposite way because I'm just going to, whatever they're doing can't be right, so I'm going to do my way. But then we still come full circle because later so much of that's ingrained into our head, we're indoctrinated into it without ever realizing it, that when we get older it starts to come back up and we start to connect the dots in our mind to how our parents had viewed things. So then we add that to the limited TV coverage, and even back then they don't talk about that. Some people will talk about it now, but they don't talk about it very much, if all, as far as I noticed. But even the nightly news is entertainment. A lot of people make a lot of effort to make sure a lot of people tune in to watch the nightly news, which can be very freaking boring. I mean, why would we don't sit there and run off a bunch of certain things because or lose our viewer base in the next 2 seconds. Well, they understood that stuff pretty well back then too. So they crafted the news. They cherry-picked stuff, and they tried to determine whether it's local or or international or what's pertinent to you or what's interesting to you or what will catch your eye. And the occasional fluff piece that will be tossed in there. They acknowledge that. So they can get you to hang in there for the advertisers because that's where they get their money. Because I mean, the news company is a company. It's a business. They're making money. And whatever it takes to make that money, because you're going to have that money. And that means lying and cheating and stealing and telling you that the sky is purple and that the birds are flying through the dirt and that, I don't know, that... whatever. So you get the idea. And so we're surrounded in a small group, a lot of these people. And then we're isolated. This only encourages us as we get older, because once we get out of school, our dynamics don't really change. A small percentage will go into the military. They will go into service. Because that's another thing that I and a lot of my peers were bombarded with, was the service stories. Our grandparents, our grandfathers served or did something. Most of our fathers and uncles, almost all of them, served in something. And so you listen to that. And then your older cousins, Mark's in the Coast Guard and Jane's in the Army. Well, because we ain't seen them since the last, it's been 4 years ago. So, but yeah, they're in the service. They've been in the service the last couple of years. They got out of high school and went to the military. They're paying their dues and getting their education up. And they did well. Mark did very, very well himself. So for him, it worked. The system worked. For Mark, it worked for about 8, 10 others. I can immediately think on top of my head in my immediate family, not so much. Right? Some of them will tell you they're living fine. Their lives are great. But is it? Sure isn't like it was. Our parents had it much better. How is it that we have to have both spouses working? To this day and age, we push the narrative. They change the narrative, and the social dynamic make it the other way around. It used to be a shameful thing for mama to work, because daddy was obviously a loafer or no good or lazy or dumb or incapable of getting a better check or a better job or whatever. So you get all this added together, we get into this narrow group, and then we have this group of people that do serve, and a lot of times see some pretty bad stuff, including treated poorly by the very people that are supposed to be paying them, our government. And then they come home, and these stories get circulated, and you hear it in the background, or you hear it when the parties are going on, or their family get-togethers and arguments and whatever and stuff, and it starts to sink into your head in bits and pieces. And then you go and you get old enough and you serve yourself. You go and you do some time and visit some places that you couldn't even imagine in your wildest nightmares, and then try to comprehend why and how people exist in that environment and why. And then you look back and you look at your own environment that you came up from, and you wonder, why is so much stuff so effed up? Why is America at its core so fucked up? Why is it always been this way? And I go back and I look at my youth and I think, sure it has. So I got a whole generation of people my age that grew up with the education being mostly told to them through that little idiot box in the living room. Maybe I guarantee you, there's out of some 30 odd relatives, there's probably 5 of us that actually read on a regular basis, and only a couple of us that read a lot. And if you don't read a variety of things, don't judge a person by the cover of the book. Judge them by the bookcase, because if you'll see the variety of stuff that it's, you got to continue to educate yourself. And of course, with modern media and social the internet stuff today, that's a much bigger and easier task, because you don't have to read as much now. If nothing else, you're actually exposed to far too much stuff, and it's hard to judge what's truthful based on facts and reality, and what's been cooked and spun. So it's just enough of the actual fact, but enough to achieve something that's actually false, or a total fabrication that's insane. I mean, we have to learn how to do that stuff. Critical thinking can be a very important tool if people are allowed to do that and stuff. Because at the end of the day, if you're not careful, you end up with a whole lot of people like this, which I spent a lot of time around growing up into my 20s and early 30s. I spent a lot of time with a number of people that easily fit into this, and that was back when I was chasing. I had a pot habit, so I'd go hang out with some people to get my bag of weed, and I'd be at their house, and I'm looking at how terribly run down it is, and they got half of them dismantled motorcycles sitting in the living room, and and there's no door jams anymore, and you're like, what the hell happened to the door jams? Then it never gets fixed. And after a while, you become oblivious to it, because you're there to get your fix and get the hell out the door. But the same people, well, they had hopes and dreams. They went to school. They had an education that may or may not have been all that great. And then they may or may not have been encouraged to do better or given proper guidance. Because, when you have a school guidance counselor, for example, who's got 300 kids on their docket, very few of them are going to ever even see this individual, let alone have any kind of guidance or advice or help from this individual. That individual is probably going to focus on 1 or 2 very specific cases, because for whatever personal reasons or professional reasons they choose to do so, right? So you get this, and then you get these people that they can't go into service for one reason or another. They either got a drug habit that prevents it, or they have a physical deformity. If you're too fat to get into service, they won't take you. especially certain eras, like in the 80s when Reagan was in charge, they were very picky to get into service. They turned down a lot of people because they didn't need a huge number of people. It wasn't for another 5 or 10 years. It wasn't until the early '90s that they suddenly needed to ratchet up stuff as we became more active on the world stage again. So, and then you add the intermix of people that their faith is taught to them by individuals whose purposes and reasons for doing so are not necessarily always conducive to that person. And what I mean by that is there are crooks and charlatans in the Christian church by the bucket full. Oh, we get a job as a dress up real nice and get a nice check every week, and my real job is basically to preach to people on the weekend and give moral support. Oof, right? How hard is that? I mean, my problem is I wouldn't know when to shut up. I would be too openly, opinionated as a preacher, because my grandfather always said I could have been a damn good preacher if I wanted to, or a used car salesman if I chose. Once again, I rebel at the idea of selling people crap. I want to tell you the truth about your crap. You're going to buy a piece of shit here, and if I was you, I wouldn't buy it. I think I would go over there and buy a different vehicle, because there's better ones over there. I wish I could tell you that I had something better for you. And then that would be a short career as a used car salesman, right? So instead, I do what I do anyway. So you add all this into a group of people who's watched an entire generation of people's hopes and dreams start to wither up. And then our generation, and I get confused sometimes because I don't quite feel like I fit in the boomers generation. I'm at the very ass end of the boomers and the very beginning of the Generation X, or whatever the fuck it was called. And so I don't keep up with that kind of stuff. It just, I got enough shit to worry about than that. But so this kind of in between layer, kind of padding in between, and all I could think of is that that it mattered. Well, now I don't remember what the hell I was talking about. See, it's just a stupid brain fart. Side of getting old. Turned 57 last week, so I'm getting there. Most of the family lived in such narrow-minded areas, and so the traditional concepts of what conservatism stands for, family and faith and responsibility, fiscal responsibility, a lot of that is because that is the conditions that we were forced to grow up in and live in. You had to be this and you had to be this, or your shit started to fall apart. And then you get intermixed with a certain point. You reach a certain age where your dynamics change, your support groups change, your social environments change. Everything's changed so radically over the past 30 years that a lot of people in their 50s today are more lost now than they were when they were in their teens, and it's sad. Or they live in this illusion because they remember the stories of their youth. They remember of how things felt neater and cleaner and simpler and less chaotic and less spooky. It's less scary, for some people. If you go back to those days, even though the fact that those days were pretty fucked up too. The 70s was a massive upheaval time in our country on the social side of things. Can you imagine the late 60s, early 70s equal rights movement and stuff, if they had access to the social to an internet and cell phones? Can you imagine how effed up the world everything would appear to be? I mean, Jesus. So the time seems simpler, and then that's based on stories from our parents talking about times when they were a kid, when they grew up in the early 50s, right after the war, the late 40s, early 50s, when America boomed and everybody come home and the wartime industry became a commercial economic industry. And jobs had good money and you had good unions and people could afford, dad could go out and have a job and work a blue collar job and buy a house and buy a car, maybe buy 2 cars and have all the luxuries of a good, what we would consider an average American household, and not have to be tearing out his hair as to how he's going to pay for all of it. you know, and Mama stayed home and took care of the house, and she took care of the social and civic duties and stuff for the family, and so on and so that nuclear family stuff. Yeah, that's the time that a lot of these people, we need to go back to a simpler time. They're not looking at all the other negatives that were in play, although there are some who want the negatives too because they makes them feel superior or something. And well, that's a whole nother video for another day. But so we get a lot of people who are in an isolated environment that are bombarded by they get most of, if not all of their news from very limited sources, which still holds true today. This is when we get dangerous, when those limited news sources don't tell the truth, that they spin a narrative that's meant to pursue the green and not the red and the blue, the red, white, and blue of the agenda of the country. And by doing so, you give this false information to a bunch of people who are already suspicious, already tired, already almost hopeless with, this is life doesn't get any better than where I'm at now. No matter what I do, I can't make it better. And then you get a sense of, I don't know, you just kind of you're settling. And you either, if you think about it, if you let it, it'll drive you crazy, and it does screw with people, right? Or you become extremely cynical, right? That's why I chose the phrase is "I think you suck" when we talk about Beavis and Butthead here, because there are a whole slew of people, a large percentage of my generation of people who believe that and know. They believe it because there's some solid truth to it, that everybody sucks out here. The whole world sucks. Everything sucks so bad because we're trying to I don't know, trying to f everybody over to get our own thing, and there's just not enough to go around, and we've resigned ourselves to the fact that Jesus, what's the point? So when we get an opportunity for somebody that comes along who bucks the system, so somebody like Trump comes along, and Trump's, that FU mentality, I'm doing my way kind of stuff, was something that a lot of these people have been waiting for a long time, with somebody that also connected a little bit to them on a personal level. And so a lot of ways, Trump's behaviors, sans the money, is almost equal to a lot of the behaviors of a lot of our peers. A lot of our peers act just like him on a smaller scale. Now, the difference being is when you give somebody who's already arrogant and deluded and willfully ignorant and environmentally ignorant, purposely isolated because the system has failed to educate you to the best of its abilities, then you're going to get a bunch of people who then are going to not think, they're going to assume everybody else is out to get them or screw us over or take advantage of stuff. At some point they become cynical to it, or worse. Then you add money to it. So when you get somebody that's already in that position, Trump is a product of his environment as well. He didn't earn that money. He had daddy's money, and daddy's money gave him an early sense of entitlement that put him in a different category. Somehow his shit didn't stink. Somehow he could do whatever he wanted, and everything he said was worth gold, and more important, people should give him money for it. Sound familiar? Okay. So it's not hard in some ways to see how these people get stirred up. The dangerous part, though, is some of these people have long since given up. And now they've had this sense of this resurgence of a real hope that something would change for the better. Even though they're blind to the fact that the forces that they want to help enact that change actually want to change things for the worse for them personally. That's because the education and our very limited sources of information are controlling the narrative that this portion of the people hear, where the other portion of the people are getting their narrative from other sources. So ideally, the best result would be that every individual getting information from a number of different sources on a regular basis, even if those sources conflict with each other. Because if nothing else, it makes you stop and hopefully think about what they're saying and what that might mean to you and yours and the rest of us. Maybe maybe I don't know the hell I'm talking about. Okay. So the dangerous part of this is you've got this culture that's also strong believers of service and faith and believing in things long past the point of not needing proof. Because the very fact that you need to be able to do that, if you can't do that, then a lot of the things like faith in family and faith in God uh, are worse than worse than mockery in that way. It's really bad when that sort of stuff, because they can set them off and turn them into very irrational people really quickly. And then you had this, like I said, this somewhat small sense of entitlement. Somehow life should be better. We're entitled to have better things, and that we're getting screwed. But we're not understanding that the actual people who are screwing us over are misdirecting us to the wrong people. They want us to look at this problem, look at these people. These are the people that are causing you to have a problem. This is why you can't get ahead. This is why you can't have nice things. This is why you can't move up to the next category, why you can't be a millionaire too. You know, the truth is, everybody in America could be a freaking millionaire. We could all be millionaires tomorrow if the government really wanted to set it up that way. The government wouldn't function properly if they did, and many of our institutions and system would be totally radically and forever changed. In addition to that, most likely the economy would just spike out of control, even worse, to the point where you'd be a millionaire, but it would cost you, $500 for a gallon of milk. Just the way everybody can be a millionaire. I mean, that's why there has to be the have-nots and the haves. Well, there has to be and the sad part is you need a huge, massive amount of have-nots so the haves can be, up there at the top. Otherwise, they wouldn't be up there at the top, would they? They wouldn't. That level field, terrible level field is not for everybody kind of stuff. So, anyway, what do? Worry about these people. They talk about a possible civil war. Yeah, some of these people, they got a lot of guns. They got a lot of hidden anger. They've a lot of repressed feelings in this sense of lack of control. And there's a danger of them even more so now. Especially, that's why I worry. I know Trump needs to go to prison. He needs to go to prison because he broke the law, and if even one of those things gets proven, then he has to go to prove the system is equal for everyone. Because if they find some way to keep him from not going to prison, it better be going to a mental hospital because he's brain fried. Because other than that, that's the only two acceptable. Any other situation causes much more problems than it's worth. The downside is that there's a whole slew of these people who have married themselves to this Trump cart, and if Trump the horse is removed from the race, they're going to be at a loss what to do, and they're going to be extremely vulnerable to being exploited by somebody else, or they're going to flip, and they're just going to snap, and they're going to resort to some of that ingrained violence that's also inherent in many of the lower, the poorer side of the community. When you have less money to deal with stuff, you tend to resort more on physical ramifications when necessary. Because I can't afford to hire a lawyer, I'm going to break your keys. That's just the way it is. I'm going to break your knees because I can't afford to hire a lawyer. After I broke your knees and I go to jail, well, then they'll give me a free lawyer. And I'll have to pay for it, right? Because that's their mindset. Anyway, I'm Rick. You're not. Hope you guys have yourself a great weekend, right?